Hi, I'm Liz Bates, and on today's Sky News Daily, we're in Westminster because it's a big day for the Chancellor Rachel Reeves. The spring statement. 6 months on from the budget, it's basically an update on how things are going with the economy, and they're not going that well. It's not her fault. At least that's what she says. It's global factors that are making things difficult, but she's up for the challenge.
Now our task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes. Mr. Speaker, the job of a responsible government is not simply to watch this change. This moment demands an active government, a government not stepping back, but stepping up.
And the Office for Budget Responsibility, that's the body that marks the Chancellor's homework, isn't making her life easy either.
And the OBR have today revised down our growth forecast for 2025, from 2% in the autumn to 1% today. I am not satisfied with these numbers, and that is why we on this side of the House are serious about taking the action needed to grow our economy.
Lower growth, higher borrowing, inflation not coming down as much as the government would like. All of this is making it difficult for Rachel Reeves to meet her self-imposed fiscal rules and maintain her headroom by making cuts. And if you don't really understand what all of that jargon means, don't worry. We're here for you. We've got the best in the business, our political editor, Beth Rigby, and our economics editor, Ed Conway, to explain it all. So let's get on with it. First of all, thank you so much for joining me, Beth and Ed, two of the busiest people in Westminster today, and I'm including the Chancellor in that. An iconic duo, making sense of some pretty detailed economic news today. What are your initial reactions?
That's quite a billion is my initial reaction. We're an iconic duo. Do you like that?
No, it's intimidating.
I know, and I'm freaked out now. I don't know what to say.
Don't entirely believe that.
Where should we start? Where do you want to start, Liz?
Well, why don't we start with some terms we keep hearing about, the fiscal rules and headroom. What do they actually mean?
Two rules. Okay. The first of them is you need to have the current budget, which is basically all of your just day-to-day spending. You need to have that in a surplus, so basically where you're not having to borrow in order to finance that. And then there's another rule which says you need to get this quite obscure measure of debt, the national debt, you need to get that falling towards the end of the forecast horizon. That's a bit easier because this measure of debt isn't particularly difficult to get down. So those two rules together are the things that bind the Chancellor. And she has, when we talk about headroom, all that means is you're going to meet that rule by so many billions. That's all headroom means. You know, a lot of people talk about it being this gospel truth about a certain amount of headroom, and you've got to focus on this, and you've got a certain amount of leeway. No, the leeway is just against the rules that she came up with.
Yeah.
There's, so
her hands are tied, but she tied them.
She tied her own hands, and she's tied her own hands again this time. And she's marked her own homework, and she's come up with the response that basically the answer she gave this time is exactly the same as the answer she gave last time. So there's nothing to see here, but there is a lot.
For me, she's obviously a Chancellor in a very tight spot, but she's trying to face it down, actually. She's stuck to her fiscal rules. She's found billions of spending cuts. She's faced down slower growth. And she's basically said, stick with the plan is working. And she's found these sort of green shoots on the horizon in terms of getting the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility. They do the fiscal forecast, the independent financial fiscal watchdog. She's got them to kind of cost some of her planning reforms, for example, so that she could at least stand up and say, I know there's a lot of pain in the short term, but the plan is working, stick with me. And I think it gave her a bit of political space today in what is a pressure cooker that I don't think will be relenting in the coming months. What do you think,
Can I give
Ed?
you my geeky but actually interesting little nugget?
That's what we want from you, Ed.
That's what I'm here for.
That's all we want
That's
from you.
basically my career. She's made these fiscal rules. She said she's always going to stick to them. They're ironclad, all of this stuff. Last time, the room she had, before she broke them, was £9.9 billion. This time, £9.9 billion. And it's even more curious than that, because you can go to one more decimal place. Last time, she had £9.93 billion. This time, £9.93 billion. So it's almost like everything is designed to say, oh, no, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. Look to 2 decimal places, everything's exactly the same as it was before. But that's to ignore this massive change that's happened. Enormous change, because beneath the surface, she broke her fiscal rules fundamentally. She broke them and then had to step in and, all of these benefits cuts, which involve thousands of children potentially facing poverty, hundreds potentially of thousands of working age people facing poverty. You've got massive spending cuts to the extent that in the final 3 years of the forecast horizon, so the final 3 years that we're looking at here, it's going to be the same rate of spending increase as Jeremy Hunt. So it's the same as the Conservatives. So it's this strange kind of paradox of the Chancellor wanting to say fundamentally nothing's changed, but beneath the surface an extraordinary amount of things have changed, and there's potentially, it's hard to say because we're literally a few hours after kind of getting all the documents, but you can see a lot of potential hand grenades in the same way that there were kind of bombs buried in the last budget.
In terms of those big changes that you're talking about under the surface, can you actually break down some of the biggest changes that have been made?
Take the welfare changes that were announced today. Last week, Liz Kendall makes the cuts because they don't want Rachel Reeves to have to be associated with £1 billion of welfare cuts when she's having to do it because of growth forecasts being downgraded, which is the truth of it, right? But when you look at them, it's 3.3 million people are going to be affected and could lose some benefits. That's a huge amount of people. As Ed was saying, if you look at the poverty assessments, 250,000 people pushed into relative poverty. I think it's 60,000 children pushed into relative poverty. Now, what the government would say, what my sources are saying to me is actually when you look at the assessments and then you factor back in, these assessments don't take into account the living wage. It doesn't take into account a poverty programme that the government's implemented, i.e. they don't think that will be the case. But can you imagine politically, this is really uncomfortable for a lot of Labour MPs. So, as you said, there are things within this that are going to be really difficult for the government to sell. But at the same time, for the Chancellor, she has sort of set her stall on being the Iron Chancellor. She set her stall on the fiscal rules. And she's tried to create impression today of, the ladies not for turning, nothing to see here. The issue, I think, also, though, is the fragility of it all, which the OBR kind of summed up when it said the margins are so small, the volatility, the trade, interest rates, so much could change that in 6 months we could well be back here again when she's having to take massive decisions again on more spending cuts, more tax rises, or changing to the borrowing. So the way I would characterise it is a chance that's kind of bought a bit of political breathing space today, but the idea that she's off the ropes or that there won't have to be much more radical surgery of the Rachel Reeves plan in but a few months' time, that is really unclear. In fact, it's probably likely that there will have to be some more changes. Oh,
completely. But also just what you were referring to a moment ago, it's much messier than you might have thought. I mean, this government wanted to market itself on its competence and its stability. But last week saying you're going to raise £5 billion and then saying, this week it's kind of less than that. And the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, what happens behind the scenes in the run-up to these events is there's a bit of back and forth. You give them your policies, they say, OK, that's going to raise that, that's going to raise that, and then you go back and then, kind of think again. They just didn't go through that this time. And that's crazy given that it's not, it was their own policies. It was their own welfare bill.
And what were if there were any, positive takeaways from today?
If you think about the framing of this Labour government, it was all about the economy is awful, it's hard yards, it's going to take a while to turn it around. And what she at least politically was able to show today, she was able to say the OBR has uprated growth for later in the Parliament. The OBR has said that we will add 0.6% to GDP in the next decade from some of our policies. So for those that want to believe in what Rachel Reeves is doing, she had enough there to sell a story, to tell a story.
She did, yeah.
Right?
I think she did, and I think it's true as well, because the OBR did do that. They did say, look, you're going to have more homes built, and it's going to be positive for growth. kind of pedantically, it's not massively positive. So, you know, in the scheme of things, it's not going to set us back to kind of, you know, roaring levels of growth. When you read the kind of details of the OBR report, it's not like they're suddenly like, oh, this is great, everything's kind of going, you know, gangbusters. And, you know, I was looking at my phone in the course of kind of the live show that we were doing. I'm also looking at stuff, news lines breaking from the US saying America might default on its debt right now. And so that's the other elephant in the room. Like you were saying, you know, there's a massive hostage to fortune, which is she's left the headroom, fiscal headroom, the same as it was before. And the world economically and geopolitically is a much scarier place now. But I would say that, you know, again, in their defence, you can't really prepare for much of that stuff.
On that very specific point, the OBR downgrading the growth forecast from 2 to 1%, that actually feels quite significant. How damaging really is that? And is it as significant as it seems?
It is significant. That's part of the reason why that headroom, you know, the deficit is higher, there's more borrowing, there's less room for her to play with. The good news is that it's not like the OBR has looked at the economy and said, oh, it turns out, you know, it's much more rubbish fundamentally than we thought it was. The bad news is they might do that exercise next time around. I'm actually kind of more inclined to be optimistic about the economy if I could, but it's quite hard when you look at the economy right now to be all that kind of positive and punchy about it, just because there's so much that's a bit scary right now, and that's part of the reflection of that.
I do think on the framing, though, of it, on kind of the story that they want to tell, like put it in the context of a chancellor that's really on the ropes here. She's got kind of her fiscal headroom's wiped out because of slowing growth and rising debt costs. She can either change her borrowing rules. She doesn't want to do that because she doesn't want to lose credibility. She can tax more, really can't do that. She's just loaded up 40 billion of tax. Or she can cut spending. And this is a government that's saying no austerity. I mean, who'd want to be Rachel Reeves? That's like a shit sandwich, isn't it, really? So the way they've done it is the framing of it's quite clever, because what they've done is they've just pitch rolled all the spent, it's going to be awful, the black hole, savings. And then they came out with, hey, but look, growth is forecast to be better at the end of the Parliament and our plans are going to work. And when that was all going on, we were in the studio going, we weren't expecting that. Someone actually sent me a rabbit emoji, and I think that they were internally, at least, quite pleased that, given that this just felt like a smorgasbord of just horrible news.
I wouldn't be able to find the rabbit emoji if I was looking at my phone, but that's a sign of my age.
They probably saved it up. They probably sent it to like 50 people.
It would take me like half an hour to try and find it.
Just put rabbit in.
Are we starting to get a sense of this Labour government and what its broader economic strategy is, what its, dare I say it, even economic ideology is that kind of underpins Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves? What are they about?
Yeah, I actually think we are getting a bit of a sense of that, with the sense of, they keep saying it, so you can't miss it, active government, like an active state. And when you hear Starmer, he will talk repeatedly about how he believes in the state and an active state. And he doesn't believe in the sort of more conservative philosophy that you just pull out of everything and you just have deregulation, low taxation, leave it to business and let them get on with it. He does believe in interventionism. That, I think, is clear. But the tension that they've got is he believes in intervention of an active state, but actually they've created the environment where they're also probably going to have to cut back the state.
They haven't got the money to do it.
Quite sharply. And I think that this is going to be this inherent tension.
In terms of intervention, the weird thing about today, just like in general as an event, is they could have turned up and said, listen, we're going to do a bit more of an event and we're going to take the fiscal bull by the horns, or whatever the analogy is, and actually do something about it. Instead, everything is pitched in a way to just say, look, there's nothing to see here. And what it does is it gives you the impression of them responding to events rather than actually kind of directing events themselves. And so I'm a bit more sceptical. I still am trying to work out, with the best will in the world, what they stand for economically. Is it still securonomics? Is it net zero? Is it defence? It could be any of those things, depending on which day or which person is turning up. But I don't know which one's definitive.
There's some sad news for the podcast. We're going to have to lose Beth Rigby.
I've got to go. Literally, cue the door.
Sorry, Beth. You're very important.
Bye.
We've got to lose you.
I'm really not
She's
that
going to see the
important, but we have a Chancellor press conference.
All
See you
right.
later.
Bye, Beth.
No probs. Do I go?
can I just keep you for a little bit longer? Because just on this issue of ideology, are there any similarities, do you think, between what is happening in the UK and the Trump administration? Because I see a bit of that, this kind of cutting back on bloat on the civil service, increasing defence spending at the same time as cutting overseas aid. Am I over-egging it?
It's a really interesting question. We're in a different age now. You know, even in the last 6 months, when I go out and I talk to businesses quite a lot, and the striking thing is 6 months, no, even like 2-3 months ago, they were just talking about things like net zero and investment in net zero. And now it's not like that stuff's gone away, but now it's like we just need to talk about defence. And so the world is shifting, and you've got a sniff of that, I think, from Rachel Reeves, that there are also economic opportunities alongside the investment that we need to put into defence. And it so happens that the UK actually has a lot of quite impressive advanced defence companies. But on the flip side, they're not like Trump in as much as, you know, we talk about some of the jiggery-pokery going on behind the scenes here, and the way the welfare kind of bill was planned and was run through the OBR, clearly that was a bit shambolic, frankly. But it's nothing like what we've seen in the way that policy's been made in America. You know, we're sitting here on the 26th of March. On the 2nd of April, Donald Trump is going to stand up, probably sit down, in the White House, and we'll find out. But we'll also find out, like, what on earth the measures he's going to come up with are. Are we going to face massive tariffs? Is the rest of Europe? What about Canada? What about Mexico? Those are totemic, massive decisions that will affect the next budget much more than probably a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now. And we just don't know. No one in this government has a clue what Donald Trump's going to do next, because frankly, a lot of people in his administration don't have a clue what he's going to do next. So we're nothing like that. But the world has changed.
It's been a very busy day in Westminster, which is why our political editor had to run off to a press conference with the Chancellor. Please forgive us for that, but we thought you'd probably like to hear how it went. So we'll leave you with this. Here's Beth Rigby.
Is it time for you to level with people and admit that your plan hasn't protected them? And the truth is that you are going to have to come back for more tax rises or spending cuts in the budget in October unless you change your fiscal rules. Thanks.
That what I said during the election was that you can't tax and spend your way to prosperity. The previous government only knew tax and spend. They didn't know growth. We are growing the economy. The OBR have revised up every year after this one for growth and forecast that the economy will be bigger than they were envisaging in October.
So you're not coming back for more?
Well, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets. I've just delivered a spring statement today, but I think you can see through this spring statement how determined I am, how determined this government is to live within the means that we set ourselves in the budget last year and to grow our economy, because that is the way to sustainably improve living standards and have the money that we need for our public services.
That's it for today. Before you go, though, we do have a favour to ask. We'd love to know a bit more about what you like and don't like about our podcast. If you've got a spare 5 minutes, you can let us know via the survey link in the podcast description. Neil will be back with you tomorrow. Thank you to Ed and Beth, and thanks for listening.
Donald Trump is heading back to the White House.
Together we can truly make America great again.
We are in for an unpredictable but fascinating 4 years.
And we're going to be following every twist and turn for the first 100 days. We'll be bringing you the latest updates and analysis first thing every morning. So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Trump 100 every weekday at 6 a.m, wherever you get your podcasts.